friends, and welcome to the channel today. I'm Luke, Thunderhead289, here on YouTube. And if you follow my channel, you know that I daily drive these clunkers to work and back every day. I flip around the F100, the 64 Galaxy, and primarily I drive the 74 Maverick. It's the super clunker out of the group, but it's got a 302 and a 4-speed, and being such a light car, it gets pretty good gas mileage, and considering my work commute is like an 80-mile round-trip deal, it makes pretty good sense. But yesterday, it seemed to have a little bit of an issue, and a lot of y'all don't know that I've kind of become a carburetor cheater in a way. At work, I guess I'm a programmer and I do automation and all the electromechanical in the plant, and I kind of designed up a little thing in my free time to autonomously control the air-fuel ratio on carburetors. Now, anyway, I have that run on the Maverick, and anyway, it seemed to save me with this scenario where I was able to drive home, but it was, you know, I could tell there was definitely something wrong, and when I pulled up the app, I could see the thing trying to aggressively adjust lean. So we probably have a power valve issue or something. We're going to jump in today. But we'll get started with a little clip of what exactly I was experiencing, and then we'll see if we can get this thing figured out. Let's jump right in. So we're sitting here at an idle, and you can see the thing is just rich as all get out. It's trying to adjust itself as lean as it possibly can, and it just can't really climb out of that completely rich scenario. Now if I turn the adjustment parameters off, you know, it goes so rich that it actually will completely shut the engine down. Alright, got the Maverick up and running. It's running kind of rough, but it's hanging in there. But, you know we have an issue. So I'll show you a little trick here. You know, Holley carburetors, one of the biggest complaints is if you want to change jets, you know, it's just a mess. And what I'm about to show you will make it exponentially easier if you have to pull the float bowl off. And boy, is she struggling. Just barely hanging in there. A super rich scenario. It's trying to adjust as lean as it possibly can, but if it's what I think it is, being the power valve, it's just dumping raw unatomized fuel, so that's going to be a problem. But anyway, what you can do is take some straight nose vice grips here, put some rubber tubes on it, and clamp that right over your fuel line. Now the engine is going to run and completely drain the fuel bowl, and when we pull it off, we're not going to run gas all over our intake manifold, which if you have a nice engine, unlike this vehicle, you know, then you're not destroying your paint or whatever else on your engine. And there she goes. Float bowl should be good and empty now, and it just makes it that much easier. So there's a few reasons here why I think the power valve on this carburetor is good for this issue. I mean, for one, this is an old vintage unit that doesn't have the backfire protection, so if it ever does backfire, it can blow out the power valve, although I didn't experience that per se. But just taking a look at a Holley float bowl, one of the things I did on the road to see kind of what might be causing this overly rich condition, and you know, carbs, they don't lose their tune. They're a static metering device in a dynamic environment, so if you see a dramatic change, chances are there's an issue, and you don't want to go adjusting stuff because, you know, you're just band-aiding the problem. So the first thing I did is I pulled the sight plug. Either a power valve or a needle and seat assembly is going to cause this overly rich out of the blue scenario. And so if you pull the sight plug and fuel isn't all the way at the top, you know, just gushing out, you know, then you know it's probably not the needle and seat. But if it is, you know, there's a good chance the needle and seat assembly is stuck, or in some cases, with running ethanol fuel over a long period of time, actually this little O-ring that seals in the body, this is a Holley needle and seat assembly, of course, it can petrify and get hard, and fuel can actually go in and around that O-ring and basically very slowly flood out the carburetor, which you'll typically see at idle when you're cruising down the road. You know, it can kind of keep up, it'll do okay, but if the needle and seat assembly is stuck or you have an issue with the needle and seat itself, again, when you pull this sight plug, fuel is going to gush out like crazy. Now on this carburetor, when I did that, fuel was where it should be in an idle scenario. So in that way, I know we don't have an issue with our needle and seat assembly on this carb. It's something else. So there we go. You see, fuel isn't gushing out like crazy. It's at least manageable. But if you tighten these up too tight, you can very easily crack a Holley float bowl, which is a sub-ideal and unsavory, to say the least, especially on a cool vintage unit like this. So typically the metering block is stuck on pretty good on a carb. So, you know, you don't want to get in here with a screwdriver and kind of pry on it. You can mess a lot of things up. I usually go for these plugs. You can get right under here on the throttle horn, choke horn type deal, and just use that as a lever and pry it off. So now we can see that I would definitely believe at this point we have a power valve issue. So let's take a look, and basically one of the telltale signs that your power valve is having a problem. Alright, so taking a look here, we can see a lot of dampness on our body of our carburetor right in this area, and this should all be vacuum. There should be no fuel that flows through this area. Basically, vacuum is working on the back of the power valve itself, and based on the rating, this is a 10.5 unit, seeing as how this thing idles with like almost 20 inches of vacuum. This seems to do really well on the AFR gauge for this setup. But basically when vacuum drops below that vacuum setting, this one being 10.5, basically the vacuum is no longer overcoming the spring. See, vacuum holds this spring down. Vacuum's working on the back, of course, and when vacuum drops below whatever inch of mercury your setting is at, this one's a 6.5, so when vacuum drops, that spring is now stronger than the vacuum force. It opens up, fuel flows in this side, of course, from the float bowl area through these little windows and then through the power valve restrictors, effectively enriching the mixture. So long story long, you should not have any fuel on the back of the power valve or in this area of the carburetor. This should all be vacuum. So we'll see here if we can pull this off and not ruin the gasket. There we go. Again, you never have to grill arm any of this stuff. It should be fairly loose. Okay, and this one actually did it. Cool deal. So a lot of times guys pull out their power valve and they'll say, hey, you know, the issue is someone put 2 gaskets on this thing, but actually the original gasket at this point has sheared, and more often than not, I guess, when you pull them apart, they'll actually do this, and it gives you the misconception that you have 2 gaskets and that's your problem, but actually that's not true. That's a full gasket, and that just seems to be how they come apart. See if I can find a normal one here. You can see that the original, or the unused one, is quite a bit thicker. And if you try and reinstall a new power valve with just 1 gasket, you know, 11 times out of 10, that's going to leak fuel again, and you'll have the same issues. So, common misconception there. And you can see in here, maybe if I can pull this off, there we go. There's our power valve restrictors. Now I have these unmodified. These are just the stock casting, but that's where the fuel goes in and goes into your main jet circuit and effectively enriches your mixture. You can see the wetness in the back of the power valve. That is not good. And if you're nuts, like me, what you can do is you can just suck on the back of the power valve. Kind of an awkward thing to do, I guess. But I can't get that little piston to pull in, so I know that this power valve is effectively foobar. Now, another interesting thing about power valves is a lot of folks with, you know, big cams or whatever, they'll say that, well, I think my power valve is opening at idle. And, you know, I took a moment once upon a time to, I guess, bust this myth here, and I stuck some wire in the power valve, and with an air fuel gauge on this car, I actually let it idle and run, and, you know, which would effectively hold the power valve open, and I didn't see any noticeable difference at idle. Now, it is something you want to keep in mind, but a power valve, even if it does open at idle, it's not going to affect your idle mixture because you're on your idle feed restrictors and everything else. You're not pulling through the boosters yet. So just something there to think about. But anyway, I don't drop this thing into oblivion. Quick trick here. It's very easy to shear these when you put them on. So we're just going to steal a little bit of oil from our dipstick. And it never hurts just to get a little oil or grease on this bad boy. You can almost think of it as a, you know, like an oil filter O-ring. And one thing before we get too crazy here, lined up across the wording is the little fueling windows there. So basically where the numbers aren't is where the windows are. So we want to line that up with our metering block. So if I can do this all with leaning over the cam and everything, you want to make sure that guy doesn't slide out of place. Very easy to do. All right, there we go. So now we want this area here to line up with our restrictors. So we're just going to give it the turn it needs to get there. There we go, maybe a little more. Pythagoras getting the best of me here. All right, and there we go. We have our power valve all back in place, windows are lined up, and our seal is good. Reassembly here is not too overly complex, of course. Back on. Now the biggest trick with these single feed carbs, apparently this one had an O-ring in it, just want to make sure your seals are still aligned on your fuel tube. And this one has a few particularly strange things. If I can get this all snaked in here. And again, just really avoid going crazy tight on these. For one, it just makes them hard to get back apart. And for two, these Holley float bowls are made out of just like pot metal. And some of the aluminum bodied units, they're even weaker. So if you go too tight, you can very easily crack those in a hurry. All right, we're gonna pop our fuel line restrictor here and fire it. And we're just leaving the air cleaner off because we want to immediately check to make sure there's no leaks. This is the O-ring I was fighting with here and what a lot of folks end up fighting with. So you just want to be patient and make sure everything gets good and seated and sealed, or else, you know, it's a big old nasty fuel leak. Now if you're really lucky, when you release your clamp, there'll be a little bit of back pressure on that line still. And then you get a little bit in your float bowl, enough to get some accelerator pump, and she'll kind of light right off. Maybe. Because I said that, probably not. Oh, we don't have anything in the bowl. There we go. Helps if you don't leave your key on and your fan on when you go inside. There we go. Alternator's back up and going. And she is idling. Got a little bit of foot feed here, but exponentially cleaner. There we go. Minty. Check for fuel leaks. That's the way we're supposed to be sounding. Good deal. No fuel leaks. Looking pretty good. Can't argue with that. Our adjustment valve is running and trimming our air-fuel ratio. I can hear it going. And it seems like it's not trying to chase it all over the place, so we're good. So with that, my friends, I think we got it sorted. Not too terribly bad. If you follow the breadcrumbs, it's always pretty easy to figure out what's wrong with the carbureted engine. And largely, you never really have issues, you know. I've been driving this car 9 months, and this is the first real thing that's come up, and this carburetor was ancient, you know, so no surprise. But it's always fun to go through and figure out what might be wrong and to get it fixed up, and, you know, just appreciate that your car is going down the road essentially because you will it to. You know, there's no fancy computers, or, well, there's a fancy computer on this car, but normally there's no fancy computers or anything, and it's just going down the road because you had the knowledge to do it. So with that, thanks for coming along with me, guys. Hope you learned something, and see you for the next one.